Chapter 49, The Choosing. And thanks to my betas, Daryl Deem and Alex 33, for checking this over. All mistakes are my own, especially since I have a bad habit of adding things and not sending it back to them. And the drawing of the names is adapted from canon because J.K. Rowling is a much better author than I. Disclaimer. I don't own anything related to Harry Potter. That privilege belongs to J.K. Rowling and all those who she lets make money for her. HP, same night at long last, the golden plates returned to their original spotless state. There was a sharp upswing in the level of noise within the hall, which died away almost instantly as Dumbledore got to his feet. On either side of him, Professor Karkaroff and Madame Maxime looked as tense and expectant as anyone. Ludo Bagman was beaming and winking at various students. Percy Weasley looked on eagerly. He must be the replacement for Mr. Crouch, since he was in that department. The mutineers felt the tension, hoping they did everything they could to stop either Potter from being chosen. The goblet of fire had not been left unattended all day. No one went near it that wasn't putting their name in, and there had been only one failed attempt to enter Harry's name. They discussed it with the adults, and since Durmstrang was outside of the maps, they had no idea who Imperius the poor student. After the adults chased away the impostor, they didn't see his name on the map the rest of the day. That, and they hoped they injured the man enough to give them a small reprieve. Well, the goblet is almost ready to make its decision, said Dumbledore. I estimate that it requires 1 more minute. Now, when the champions' names are called, I would ask them please to come up to the top of the hall, walk along the staff table, and go through into the next chamber. He indicated the door behind the staff table, where they will be receiving their first instructions. He took out his wand and gave a great sweeping wave with it. At once, all the candles except those inside the carved pumpkins were extinguished, plunging them into a state of semi-darkness. The goblet of fire now shone more brightly than anything in the whole hall, the sparkling bright, blue-eye whiteness of the flames almost painful on the eyes. Everyone watched, waiting. A few people kept checking their watches. Gary's eyes were glued to the two bright flames. He was starting to sweat with anticipation. It beaded up on his forehead and dampened the back of his neck. He could feel his brother reacting the same way. They didn't want to be in this stupid tournament. The only time they ever heard of any of the former champions was in the classes that were taught today. There was no glory to come from these gladiator-type games. Any minute now, Victor said. His was an eager anticipation. Gary nodded with a tight smile. The flames inside the goblet turned suddenly red again. Sparks began to fly from it. Next moment, a tongue of flame shot into the air. A charred piece of parchment fluttered out of it. The whole room gasped. Dumbledore caught the piece of parchment and held it at arm's length so that he could read it by the light of the flames, which had turned back to blue-white. The champion for Durmstrang, he read in a strong, clear voice, will be Victor Crumb. Way to go, Victor, Gary yelled over the sudden noise, clapping his new friend on the back. Victor rose and slouched up toward Dumbledore. He turned right, walked along the staff table, and disappeared through the door into the next chamber. Bravo, Victor, boomed Karkaroff, so loudly that everyone could hear him, even over all the applause. Knew you had it in you. The clapping and chatting died down. Now everyone's attention was focused again on the goblet, which, seconds later, turned red once more. A second piece of parchment shot out of it, propelled by the flames. The champion for Beauxbatons, said Dumbledore, is Fleur de Lacre. Congratulations, Miss de Lacre, Harry said from his place next to her. She gave him a tight nod and rose from the Ravenclaw table and shook back her sheet of silvery blonde hair and swept up between the Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff tables. Oh, look, they're all disappointed, Mandy said over the noise, nodding toward the remainder of the Beauxbatons party. Disappointed was a bit of an understatement, Harry thought. Two of the girls who had not been selected had dissolved into tears and were sobbing with their heads on their arms. Luna was patting one of them on the back, probably telling her that the Noggles had infested her or some such thing. Harry just shook his head fondly and smiled at his quirky friend. After the Vila II had vanished into the side chamber, silence fell again, but this time it was a silence so stiff with excitement you could almost taste it. The Hogwarts champion next. And the goblet of fire turned red once more. Sparks showered out of it. The tongue of flame shot high into the air, and from its tip Dumbledore pulled the third piece of parchment. Everyone in the mutineers tightened their grip on whatever they were holding and waited. "The Hogwarts champion," he called, "is Cedric Diggory." Hufflepuff and the mutineers rose as one to cheer the Hogwarts champion on. They stamped their feet and raised their voices to call congratulations to the seventh-year Hufflepuff. Cedric made his way past them, grinning broadly, and headed off toward the chamber behind the teacher's table. Indeed, the applause for Cedric went on so long that it was some time before Dumbledore could make himself heard again. "Look at Dumbledore. He keeps looking at the goblet, like it is supposed to shoot out another name. Do you think he was behind that Durmstrang student getting cursed?" Gary thought to his brother. Harry looked at the headmaster and narrowed his green eyes. "If you weren't looking for it, you would have missed the glances. He might have been, since it was my name and not yours. Voldemort would have entered you, but I think Dumbledore would have entered me to see if he could cause a rift between us," he answered. They both started to get nervous. Dumbledore was a very powerful wizard and who knew what he had up his overly bright sleeve. They kept their eyes glued to the blue-white flames. "Excellent," Dumbledore called happily as at last the tumult died down. The twinkle in his eyes seemed dimmer. "Well, we now have our three champions. I am sure I can count upon all of you, including the remaining students from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, to give your champions every ounce of support you can muster. By cheering your champion on, you will contribute to a very good relationship between them. Now, I and the other officials must attend the champions so they know what they're going to endure for these games. Mingle with our remaining guests or return to your common rooms. I advise you do the former." And with that said, after one more disappointed glace at the goblet, Dumbledore adjourned to the chamber where the champions disappeared. Madame Maxime and Headmaster Karkaroff, along with Bagman and Percy, joined him. Harry went to join Gary at the Gryffindor table, smiling like he had won a contest. Gary's smile and sense of reprieve was just as overwhelming. Team Potter dodged another bullet. Relief could be seen in the other mutineer's eyes. Teamwork was what it was all about. They'd call the parents first chance they got. "Barn," Gary said to the stoic boy, "sorry your name wasn't chosen. Your headmaster seemed to approve, though." The headmaster has always favored Victor. It is to be expected," the older boy said with a curt nod. "Still, sorry, I know you were hoping to be picked," Harry said as he clapped Barnes back and took the seat next to him. "Don't be stupid," came Ron's voice from down the table. "Of course Crumb was chosen, he's the best." The three Durmstrang boys glared at the redhead, making him shrink into himself. He is the best, however. I will let you know dis, little boy." He tapped his finger on the table. "He also hates what you call fanboys." Barnes sneered at the cowering boy, and then dismissed him as unimportant and resumed his conversation with the twins. "I am glad you names ve're not chosen," he said politely. "Boy, so are we," the twins said together. Then they grinned at one another. "Vi ve're worried. Your headmaster vas on our boat this afternoon. We did not know why he vas da," Barn whispered, leaning forward as he spoke. "Well, we don't want to accuse anyone of doing anything we can't prove, but we stopped one of your peers from entering Harry's name. He was under the Imperious curse. We didn't hurt him, just gave him a reason to fight harder," Gary whispered back. "Den you have our tanks. We are taught to fight this curse, so whoever cast it would have to be much powerful," the Durmstrang boy said as he nodded to the twins. The other two nodded as well. You could see the calculating looks in their eyes, though. The twins didn't feel one bit sorry for the headmaster. "Let's talk about something a bit more cheerful. We're supposed to be celebrating our champions," Harry said with a bright smile, though it was a bit forced and didn't quite reach his eyes. "Duh," Barnes said and lifted his cup, which was refilled with pumpkin juice. "To the champions, and may the best man," or woman, Parvati was heard to say, "Vin." The rest of the group joined him with cries of their chosen's name. The rest of the time before curfew was spent mingling among the guests. The mutineers were especially cheerful and friendly. Harry and Gary introduced their girlfriends to their new friends, and everyone went to their respective dorms, or housing, in good moods. Even the Beauxbatons students cheered up with all the welcome they received from the Hogwarts students. Harry went back to the Ravenclaw dorm with his friends, and they spent the rest of the night, until bedtime, doing their homework. Professor Watts had given them a 12-inch essay on the tournament due in 2 days. When he got to his bed, he pulled out his mirror and called his dad. After his father's haggard face showed, he all but shouted, "We did it, Dad." James forced a smile on his face and answered, "We know. Terry had his mirror on him, so his parents listened to the whole ceremony." Harry blushed. Why didn't they think of that? "Sorry, Dad, we didn't think. I guess we were too nervous or something," he said as his face got brighter red. "Don't worry, son. We're just happy neither one of you were picked. But don't let your guard down. We still have someone out there trying to hurt you guys," James said forcefully. This wasn't over. There was still a threat to his family. "We'll keep on the lookout. We think Dumbledore tried to Imperius one of the Durmstrang students into putting in my name. We stopped him, but that was only because he was fighting the curse, and Gary gave him a choice that went with what he was told," Harry said, rubbing his face wearily. He was so tired of trying to catch people out to harm them. He was only a 14-year-old boy whose only thoughts should be classes, Quidditch, and girls. Well, he still had time for Daphne. No matter how much training his parents and Sally did, that didn't prepare him for real fights. "That rat bastard," James shouted, suddenly not tired anymore. "It is bad enough we have to worry about Voldemort." He spat the name and his minions. "Now we have to continue worrying about that manipulative old man. I thought he was going to leave us alone, after trying all summer to get us to let him teach you too. Damn him." He threw the mirror on the bed and got up pacing and shouting. Lily was heard yelling much the same thing in the background, so Gary must have just told her as well. Harry kind of felt sorry for his parents, though he was also very proud of all the work they did keeping him and Gary out of the fight. He let his dad rant a while longer and then shouted to be heard. "Dad, calm down. We don't know it was him for sure. We only think it was." James stopped his pacing and fuming, picked up the mirror and looked to his son. "Sorry, Harry, I'm just tired, I guess. We'll get together with the parents and figure this out. You and Gary keep with a group at all times. Make sure you stay together. Now, tell me about the visitors. Have you met any interesting people?" he asked with another forced smile, changing the subject. Harry let him and told him about his chilly meeting of Fleur, then his friendship with Barn and his friends. He expounded on his relationship with Victor Crumb and how he was glad he was chosen as the Durmstrang champion. James grinned and nodded in all the appropriate places and congratulated his sons on making international friends. They talked until midnight, and then the Potter twins, after they finally calmed their parents down, went to bed. Gary woke up the next morning ecstatic. He wasn't picked, Harry wasn't picked, and nothing could bring him down today. He got up, did his morning rituals, and got dressed. He woke Neville and Dean, and then went into the common room. The youngest Potter twin waited for his friends by the fire. He took out his charms book and read on the current assignment, since he missed study hall yesterday. He heard someone coming down the stairs and looked up, hoping it was his friends, but it was Ron and Seamus. "Bet you're disappointed your name didn't get chosen," Ron sneered. Gary was saddened at how far Ron had removed himself from his childhood friends. "Don't think I don't know why your fans were hanging around the goblet," the redhead snapped. "You were trying to figure out a way to enter. I'll bet you the reason Fred and George tried to get over the age line. Too bad for you, Dumbledore is smarter than you." "Ron, you've known me since we were 5. Do you really think I would do that?" Gary asked calmly. Not even his ex-friend would bring him down. "Yes," was all the youngest male Weasley said. Gary just shook his head and went back to his book. He noted that Hermione was coming down the stairs. The look on her face let him know that she agreed with Ron and Seamus. Nodding to himself, he decided it was time to give up on the girl. He had other things to worry about, but not today. Today he was going to make as worry-free as possible. Lavender and Parvati were behind the bushy-haired girl and giving her looks of contempt. They took their seats next to Gary and glared at the other 3 Gryffindors. Neville and Dean soon joined them and with an expression of confusion went to stand behind Gary. "What's going on?" Neville said, regarding the 2 groups facing off. "Ron thinks Gary was trying to add his name to the goblet yesterday," Lavender snarled, "and Hermione agrees with him." She turned her glare on the bookworm. Gary closed his book and said, "Leave it, guys. We'll never convince them otherwise. They are too far into Dumbledore's pockets." He got up, dismissed the 3 glaring 4th years, and casually made his way to the portrait, ignoring the outraged shouts. When the rest of the Gryffindor mutineers joined him in a solid front, he just whistled a merry tune and made his way to breakfast. The others exchanged amused glances and then whistled along with him. The Weasley twins, of course, changed the tune. They made quite a sight, bouncing along the halls whistling as loud as they could. Other students just shook their heads and grinned. They were quite used to the weirdness of this group of students. They joined the rest of their gang at the Hufflepuff table, along with the friends they made yesterday, the 5 Durmstrang students and 3 Beauxbatons, and had a wonderful meal. Chatter was plentiful as they congratulated the champions. When Cedric Diggory came into the hall, all of Hogwarts stood and cheered. Even the Slytherins joined, clapping their hands and shouting their joy. The 7th-year Hufflepuff blushed and then bowed to each table. He then went and joined his friends, who were sitting at the Ravenclaw table. He sat next to Fleur and tried to engage her in conversation. She was having none of it, though. Meanwhile, with the parents once again, the largest dining room in the Potter Manor was filled with concerned parents. This time, though, there was breakfast at the table, so they could eat while they talked. Hopefully, that might make the meeting less tense. That and some people had work in a few hours, so they were going to have to make it a quick meeting. Lily's face once again had stress lines. It was as if her weeks at the spa never happened, though James could only speculate how much worse it would be if she hadn't gone. James rose to his feet and tapped his coffee mug with his wand, having foregone tea for the much more caffeinated beverage. Thanks again for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. Enjoy the meal while we talk. I know it is bad manners, but needs must. Everyone tiredly nodded their heads. Gifford Abbott, after filling his plate and cup, said, "James, you know we want to help you as much as we can, but I, for one, can't take any more time off work." You could see the remorse on his face. Many of the parents nodded in agreement and voiced their worries and regrets as well. James stood once again, and with a strained yet thankful smile, he said, "I know and I can't thank you enough for all that you've done for us. We won't ask you to put your jobs in jeopardy. All we ask is, you keep the rumor mill going about Voldemort." The workers looked at one another and then turned to James and Lily. "We can do that. With Pettigrew caught once more, I see no reason to keep quiet about Voldemort," Gifford said, and then returned to his meal. "Don't forget, we're going to be questioning Barty today. We'll find out if it was his son in the school yesterday, and maybe he can give us some insight about Voldemort," Amelia added, thinking of the questions she would be asking her one-time friend. Like how he got his son out of prison, and how he hid the boy. It didn't look good for Crouch SR. And once again, you have our thanks. Zeno, are there any more crystals you can put out to encourage the public to continue standing for themselves? "I don't want them conforming back into putting all their hopes on my son," the mussy-haired man asked, turning to his strange friend. "I'll have Luna make one up when she gets the chance. I'll also continue to run articles in the same vein," the white-haired man answered. He was trying to figure out how to get the crystals to Luna while she was at school. "Wonderful," James said, and then looked over the group. "Those of you already in the Hunter Committee, we just got a new purpose. We're going to be watching Hogsmeade and Hogwarts continuously. I know you guys don't have jobs, and I won't try to keep you from your family. We almost caught the intruder yesterday, so with teamwork, hopefully, we can keep the kids out of trouble. Lily and Albert are going to try and figure out why the color coding didn't work. Augusta, you keep up with your T's and try and keep them away from gossiping about our family." He turned to each person as he spoke in a suggestive tone, not wanting to come off as some sort of dictator. He was relieved when they just smiled and nodded. "Yeah, and Remus is at the school, so that helps. The ghosts also promised to keep watch," Sirius said from his place on James' left. "Don't forget Severus," Lily spoke for the first time, ignoring the snorts from the 2 marauders. "He promised to keep watch as well. He has to be more careful about it, because Dumbledore still thinks he is in his pocket." "Right, Snape, well, I hope he stays true to his word," James said with a strained smile, not wanting to cause Lily to get mad. The snort was automatic. "We'll work together with our wives," Wright said. "Well, those that don't have jobs, we men can be in the Shrieking Shack and the women can watch from the library," he added thoughtfully. "Yeah, that's a plan," James agreed, and then started his meal. The rest of breakfast was spent in discussion on schedules, and then everyone left. They would worry about Dumbledore when the time came. They had no proof of his involvement, so there was little they could do. Maybe Augusta could start spreading seeds of doubt about the old man's power. That might knock him down a few pegs and keep him too busy to interfere with the Potter family. James made a mental note to talk to her later. It would have to be done delicately. James, Lily, and Sirius went into the game room and tried to relax. We'll have to think of something extra special for everyone for Christmas, especially since the kids have to stay at Hogwarts this year, Lily said as she snuggled into her husband's side. James pulled her close and hummed an agreement, thinking of things they could do for their friends. Sirius started to snore from the other couch, making the two Potters chuckle with amusement. Since it wasn't their shift, they would relax, for now. HPHPHPN. So there you have, Team Potter wins another one. Sorry for those of you who I will lose because of this, but it was decided when I wrote the outline that they would not be in the tournament. The whole premise behind the story is to stop the trials the boys would have had. It took me a while to get back to that. Don't think the boys are out of trouble yet. I still have to get rid of the Dark Lord. For those of you who continue with this story, maybe you can give me suggestions on how to treat the parents for Christmas, like names of theatres and restaurants in London from that year, for a fun night on the town. Chapter 50, Games Played. And thanks to my beta, Deraldine, for checking this over. All mistakes are my own, especially since I have a bad habit of adding things and not sending it back to him. And thanks for all the support and the few suggestions I got for Christmas. Disclaimer: I don't own anything related to Harry Potter. That privilege belongs to J.K. Rowling and all those who she lets make money for her. HPHPHP, a short narration. The month passed quickly. Everyone continued to keep an eye out for Crouch Jr. But now that his father was incarcerated for using the Imperious Curse, there was little chance of him showing. That didn't prevent the mutineers or their parents to constantly watch. Regardless of all that, the Potter twins were in good moods. Very little would get them down. They were safe for now, and so were their friends. The questioning of Pettigrew was a bust. The man died, he choked on his own tongue, when he tried to answer where the Dark Lord was and what the plans for the tournament were. The only thing they got out of him was that it all involved Gary. Sally and her ghosts reported nothing new. Even with Sally's connection with the dead, no news came her way. She had no idea what was going on with Voldemort, since the Dark Lord hadn't killed anyone since the caretaker at Riddle Manor that source dried up. Pettigrew's spirit was tight-lipped. Sally figured his death was enough to put the fear of Voldemort in him. The scared man thought that the Dark Lord would somehow reach through the veil and torture him even in death. So with great frustration, she sent him on to his final reward. Maybe after a few years in hell, he would realize his mistake. The mutineers made great headway in making friends with all the visitors. Luna had a special relationship with two of the Beauxbatons boys. They thought she was a wonderful gift to mankind. Gary and Harry continued their friendship with the Durmstrang boys and were being taught some spells not taught at Hogwarts. They in return were teaching Barn and his friends meditation, along with the crystals. All in all, almost everyone was getting along. Fleur de Lacre was a bit of a hold-up. She didn't want to make friends with anyone in Hogwarts. She stuck mostly to the Beauxbatons students. Harry still couldn't shake the feeling that it was all a mask, but he wasn't going to force a friendship. Then came the day after the weighing of the wands. Rita wrote another article. The headline: Did the boy who lived try and enter the Triwizard Tournament? The article went on about how one student, who wasn't named, gave an interview on how mutineers stayed around the goblet that day. It questioned as to why this would be, and speculated that Gary or Harry were trying to take the glory away from the real champions. Needless to say, the Potters were furious. Lily went straight to her lawyer and told him to bury that woman. Both boys had been brought to the headmaster's office and questioned on why they were there. It was a good thing they both had alibis. They were never alone when they were watching the goblet, so it couldn't be proven they tried to enter. One time the Durmstrang student tried to enter. Harry was hidden under the cloak, and Gary was surrounded by friends. The student in question supported their story. He was just thankful for the help they gave him. Lily also heard of this, and the howler she sent to the Great Hall caused ears to pop and many students to snicker. Gary was positive it was Ron who Skeeter talked to. Thank Merlin he had Lavender and Parvati. If anyone could nip rumor in the bud, it was the gossip queens of Gryffindor. Susan and Hannah made sure to take Cedric aside and let him know the real reason they guarded the cup that day. He said he understood. After all, neither Potter boy ever tried to take glory before. He remembered how the twins turned down the special privilege of playing Quidditch their first year. If they were glory hounds, Then they would have snapped that up right away. Augusta was diligent in squashing rumors caused by the article. She used this time to start planting those seeds of doubt on whether the headmaster had finally gotten too old to hold so many titles. November 1994, Harry was looking at the map, just before bed. He had already done his training for the night, and he was tired. But it was now habit to make sure all was well within the castle. He had just finished looking around the empty halls of Hogwarts when a movement to the side of the map caught his eye. There were names in the Forbidden Forest. One was Charlie Weasley. What could he be doing in the forest? Harry didn't want to speculate, so he took out his mirror and called Sirius. When the dark-haired animagus showed, Harry asked, "Are you guys seeing this? You mean all the people in the forest?" "Yeah, do you know who they are?" the tired teen asked. Hoping they weren't hostile, Sirius didn't seem to be worried. "Yup, we saw them earlier and me and your dad changed to our animals and went to investigate. It was dragon tamers and 3 dragons. They're here for the first task," Sirius said with a huge yawn. Surveillance was boring, even with the excitement of dragons. "Dragons?" Harry yelled, waking up a bit more. "They have to fight dragons?" he asked, now worried for his friends. "Nah, they just have to get past them," the grey-eyed man said as he waved Harry's worries away. "Oh, and that's so much better," Harry said sarcastically. "Sure it is if you think about it. Done the right way, it is easier to sneak past a dragon than it is to slay one. Beside, dragons are a protected creature. Not even for this tournament would they sanction killing one. Especially a nesting mother," Sirius explained. "Oh yeah, I guess I'm more tired than I thought," Harry said sheepishly. "We warn the champions. I wouldn't worry about anyone but that Diggory kid. The other 2 heads were both in the forest, so they probably told their students. So yeah, tell the Hufflepuff just to make it fair." "All right, I'll let him know first thing tomorrow," Harry said. His face cracked with a large yawn and he rubbed his eyes. "I'm going to bed. Good night, Padfoot." "Good night, Harry Dunn." And the mirror went blank. Harry started his crystal and Luna's misty voice soon had him asleep. The next morning the Ravenclaw mutineers went to the Great Hall. Harry's eyes roamed the hall looking for the Hogwarts champion. He spotted him at the Hufflepuff table surrounded by his friends. They were laughing and ribbing each other good-naturally. Harry almost didn't want to disturb them. Heaving a great sigh, he made his way to Cedric. "Hey, Diggory, can I talk to you for a second?" Harry asked as he approached the 7th year. "Why?" one of the other boys asked, suspicious about this 4th year. He was one of the few that believed Skeeter. Harry ignored him, having had to deal with him in the past. He kept his eyes on Cedric, and only concern showed on his face. Cedric, seeing that concern, got curious and nodded his head to his friends, letting them know he'd be right back. The 2 boys left the hall and made their way to the far wall of the entrance hall. They leaned casually against the wall, side by side. "So you know my dad and his friends are keeping an eye on the castle?" Harry asked. Everyone knew about the imposter, thanks to Crouch SR, Trial and Pettigrew's death, though they all thought the parents were just wandering around Hogsmeade. Thank Merlin, Remus managed to keep the map from Dumbledore, or they wouldn't be able to watch from the shack. Harry had no idea how Remus convinced the headmaster there were 2 Crouches, and the werewolf wasn't telling. "Yeah," was all the blonde boy said. "Well, yesterday they noticed a group of wizards in the forest. They went and investigated and found it was dragon tamers," Harry hinted, seeing if the other boy got it without him having to flat out say what the first task was. He didn't want to be accused of cheating, even though it wasn't technically against the rules. With Dumbledore always watching him, he didn't want to give the headmaster any excuses. Cedric mulled over that piece of information, and then his face paled. He nodded his head to Harry and rushed back into the great hall. He made his excuses to his friends and ran back out. Harry could only assume he was going to the library. He shrugged a shoulder and went to join his friends. Victor and the other 4 Durmstrang boys came and sat next to them. "Victor," Harry said with a nod, "I get the feeling your headmaster gave you some disturbing news." There was a questioning note in that statement. "Duh," the stoic boy said. He too was looking a little pale. "I came to ask if your champion knows what I know." Harry flashed him a beaming smile and nodded his head. The Bulgarian lost some of the tension in his shoulders and started to serve himself breakfast. The rest of the meal was spent talking about Quidditch and other sports. The Durmstrang students were actually interested in the Muggle sports the mutineers were telling them about. So, someone kicks a ball across a field while others try and stop them. but the players cannot use their hands. This is correct, Barn asked, trying to understand football. Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. Well, the goalie can use his hands, but that's all, Terry explained. Maybe we can teach you guys this afternoon. Blow off some steam, he said excitedly. It had been a while since they had a pickup game. That's a great idea, Susan said. I'll tell everyone else, and we can get some teams together. And with that, breakfast was forgotten, and she ran to do just that. That girl and football, Gary said, shaking his head fondly. Everyone finished their meal, and the mutineers told the Durmstrang students what would be best to wear. It was going to be cold, but after they played for a bit, they would be warmed up. It was a good thing it hadn't started snowing yet. This might be the last afternoon they could play before winter hit in full force. They all went to their dorms or boat and got dressed. The players put on sweats and long-sleeved t-shirts, their robes thrown over their clothes until they hit the field. The spectators just grabbed winter clothes, cloaks, gloves, and scarves. They gathered in the entrance hall and waited for the Durmstrang students. When the wayward students joined them, they went to the courtyard and set it up for the game. Barn, Schmidt, Kyle, Kurt, and Victor decided they were going to play. Other Durmstrang and Beauxbatons students were going to watch. Harry and Gary were goalies. It had been decided long ago that because of their tight connection, they could not be on the same team. Terry decided to be the referee. Lee Jordan, of course, amplified his voice to be commentator. The game lasted 2 hours, with Gary's team the winner. The visitors wanted to play one more, since it was a narrow win. They all agreed, but switched up teams. The second game lasted 1.5 hours, with Gary's team the victor by a landslide. Everyone cheered and laughed. The stress that had been hanging off Victor melted with the good fun, which was one of the reasons they suggested it in the first place. Other houses took over the field and Cedric joined in the fun. It was a large group of happy teens that went to lunch, after they changed of course. Chattering about the games lasted the entire meal, and the professors were glad to see such international cooperation. Ron and his little group of friends were extremely put out that none of the foreigners would have anything to do with them. Crumb especially snubbed the boy after his attempt to get an autograph. When the rumor circulated about Ron's talk with Skeeter, more and more students had nothing to do with that minority group. November 22, 1994, it was a biting winter's day. The first task was this afternoon, and the excitement in the air could be felt all over England. The students prattled all through breakfast, giving encouragement to all the champions. Victor wouldn't tell either of the twins what his plan was. He would just smile and shake his head. It wasn't that he didn't trust them, but rumor started somewhere. No one was paying attention to class. Soon enough, the professors just started lecturing on past first tasks and spells or charms that were used. Though they had given these lessons prior, it seemed like a good idea to go over them again. Well, all but Snape and Watts, they didn't tolerate the children being distracted. With a firm hand, they got their lessons complete. It was at lunch that the champions disappeared, causing the excitement to build. After the meal, everyone trooped out to the stadium that was built just for this task. It was a huge wooden structure that was at least 3 stories high. There was a large box midway, where the judges and officials would be seated. The round stadium held rows and rows of seats, and stairs climbed on the outsides and the middle. The mutineers all gathered as one unit and made their way to the top of the chairs. Most of them had omnioculars from the World Cup, so they didn't mind being that far from the action. They would share with those that didn't, since omnioculars recorded the other students could see the tasks between contestants. There was an enclosure off to the left of the field, which had a large screen, probably where the dragons were hidden. There was a tent off to the right that was housing the champions. This time the parents weren't left out. Those that couldn't attend the games were huddled around the mirrors. Thanks to Terry's suggestion, all the mutineers brought their mirrors to the event, much to the thanks of those men in the shrieking shack. They wouldn't be able to see, but they could listen. Bagman's voice boomed across the stadium. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Triwizard Tournament. We're going to see some exciting things happening today. When the cannon goes off, our first contestant will be Cedric Diggory, who will be facing a Swedish shortsnout. This dragon's scales are silvery blue, and its powerful flame is also a brilliant blue color. That fire is hot enough to reduce timber and bone to ashes in seconds. This won't be easy for the Hogwarts champion. Let's see what he can do. The crowd exploded with cheers, and then oh'd and ah'd when the dragon was brought into the arena. When the dragon let out a breath of fire towards the stands, many of the spectators screamed. The cannon fired, and the seventh-year Hufflepuff came out of the tent. He used a transfiguration spell to change a rock into a dog to distract the dragon. He was partially successful. The dragon took the bait, and Cedric went for the golden egg. Halfway through, the dragon turned its attention back to Cedric. It let out a burst of flame that just missed the champion, but the heat was enough to burn his face. Cedric retrieved the egg, however, and passed the task. The Hufflepuffs gave him a standing ovation, and the rest of Hogwarts joined them. "I hope he isn't hurt too bad," Susan said, gripping Gary's hand so tight the blood stopped flowing. "I'm sure he's okay," he said, patting her hand. "Madame Pomfrey will fix it right up." She said, loosening her hold. "Yes, a great show," Bagman said. "Now let's see the score for our brave Hogwarts champion." The judges stood, and Bagman gave his score first. It was a 9. Dumbledore shot a score of 8. Karkaroff gave a 4. Percy showed a 6, and Madame Maxim gave a score of 8, for a total score of 35. The crowd cheered for the higher points and booed Karkaroff. Percy's got a mix of both. "Now, ladies and gentlemen, our next champion will be Fleur de Lacquer," boomed Bagman. The Beauxbaton students and visitors stood up and clapped when the cannon went off. Fleur came from the tent and faced a common Welsh green. The Welsh green's roar is rather distinctive and somewhat melodious, and it issues its fire in narrow jets. Fleur used her Vela charm and enchanted the dragon to sleep. But while retrieving the golden egg, the dragon snored and let out a jet of flame that set her skirt alight. She extinguished the flames and retrieved her egg. "She'll lose points for that," Bagman predicted. "Now the scores." Once again Bagman went first, and once again it was a 9. Dumbledore gave a 6, Karkaroff gave a 5, Percy shot off a 5, and Madame Maxim gave an 8, the final award being 33. "I guess they weren't impressed," mused Harry. "Maybe if she had actually used a spell she might have gotten a higher score," suggested Daphne in a huff. Harry kept trying to be friends with the Beauxbaton's girl, but she kept snubbing him. Daphne wasn't jealous, per se, well, maybe a little. Harry kept insisting that it was because the girl's father was high up in the French government and would make a good political ally. Daphne agreed with that, but it didn't mean she had to like it. "Yeah, maybe," he conceded. "Now, for our final contestant, Victor Crumb." The Bulgarian ran from the tent and confronted a Chinese fireball. The fireball's scarlet and smooth-scaled were fringed with golden spikes around its snub-snouted face and extremely protuberant eyes. Its name is derived from the mushroom-shaped flame that comes from its nostrils when angered. Along with the large mushroom-shaped flame, it shoots from its mouth. Victor used the conjunctivitis curse to blind the dragon and retrieve his egg. However, when the dragon stumbled around it, smashed half of the real eggs, making Harry wonder why they used the eggs of the dragons that were supposed to be protected. Sometimes he just didn't understand officials. "Oh, bad show," Bagman said. "What will he lose for that?" Bagman seemed to be stuck on the number 9. Dumbledore gave a 5. Karkaroff shot off a 10, which caused the audience to boo. Percy gave a 6, and Madame Maxim concluded with a 6, putting Victor in first place with 36. Harry and Gary applauded for their friend, ignoring the glares from some of the Hufflepuff. Most of the school knew they were friends with the Bulgarian seeker. When the champions came out of the medical tent, the whole crowd stood up and gave a round of applause for them all. "Yes, give these brave boys and girl a big hand," Bagman said. "The next task will be just as daring. It will be held on the 24th of February. Until then, ladies and gentlemen," and he cancelled the mic. "Well, we can conclude that Karkaroff will not be a fair judge," Terry said bitterly. "Yeah, too bad he can't be replaced. I wonder what Victor thinks about it," Mandy said as they walked to the castle. "Neither will Bagman, what with giving everyone a 9. I wonder what his game is," Harry added. He knew from his dad the man was a gambler, but if he was giving all the players the same score, did that mean he wasn't betting on the tournament? The rest of today's classes were cancelled, and it was almost time for dinner. So the students of all 3 schools were making their way to the Great Hall. Now that the task was over, they all wondered what was next. Rumors going around suggested there was something happening for Christmas. A lot of girls were excited, and rightly guessed that was a dance of some sort. Of course, their history lessons pointed in that direction. So the topic turned to dresses and makeup for the girls, and who was going to ask who for the boys. The Potter twins had already confirmed with their girlfriends that if rumor was correct, they would be attending together. HPHPHP, and sorry for the condensed version of the first task and football game. I am not a sports writer. I keep trying to find someone who will co-write my action scenes, but so far no takers. Oh well, I hope you enjoyed this chapter. Chapter 51, A Day to Relax. And thanks to my betas, Daryldeem and Alex33, for checking this over. All mistakes are my own, especially since I have a bad habit of adding things and not sending it back to them. Disclaimer: I don't own anything related to Harry Potter. That privilege belongs to J.K. Rowling and all those who she lets make money for her. HPHPHP December 25, 1994. The students had been correct. The ball was announced 2 weeks ago. Christmas Day came with a ton of snow. The grounds were covered with the white stuff, and there were paths from the Beauxbatons' carriage and the Durmstrang boat, from where the students travelled for meals. The castle was a glittering beauty, everlasting icicles hung from every banister. Fairies flitted about the halls. The whole building was giving a good cleaning, so even the walls were bright, well as bright as stone could be. The suits of armor, also polished, were spelled to sing carols whenever someone passed them by. Laughter filled the halls as students opened their presents. Toys and games were shared, and teens were seen running up and down the halls. The professors didn't dock points on this day. They knew that the students needed to unwind after a grueling term. They did, however, yell at them to slow down in the halls and chastised anyone for using magic outside of the common rooms. It was Christmas night, and the whole school was filled with emotion. Most good, some worried, but you could feel the hum in the air from so much teen anticipation. First, second, and third years were pouting. They did get a special dinner that ended at 8, but it wasn't the same as a ball. Gary was in his dorm donning his dress robes. They were a deep red with gold trim. He was trying to do the impossible and tame his hair. Neville and Dean were laughing at him and joking that he should give it up as a lost cause. Neville was taking Luna to the ball. His robes were a light blue, something his grandmother picked out, but they didn't look too gaudy. Actually, they were quite tasteful, with the silver trim accenting his coloring. Luna was going to dress similarly, in a light blue gown, which looked like a fairy's dress. Dean was taking Ginny, much to Ron's disapproval. Dean had sent a letter to Mr. Weasley to ask permission, knowing she would not be able to attend otherwise. His robes were dark grey, with black trimming. Ginny's dress was silver with black trim. It was loose and perfect for a girl her age. Gary and Harry had bought it for her one Hogsmeade weekend. The dress she had received from her mum was okay, but the colouring was wrong. Ron came from the bathroom. A blush filled his face, a deep crimson, which clashed with his ginger hair and his golden robes. The robes were more like a dress with its ruffles and lace. You could tell where the poor boy had tried to make it manlier and remove some of the ruffles, which actually made it more dress-like. Gary and the other two mutineers were hard-pressed not to laugh outright, so they turned their backs on the embarrassed boy. "Hey, Gary, where are you meeting Susan at?" Dean asked, grasping at anything to get their minds off those hideous robes. "I'm going to be a gentleman and meet her at her dorm entrance," Gary said with a shrug. "Oh, I'm meeting Luna in the entrance hall," Neville said as he fixed his tie one last time. "Ginny's going to meet me in the common room," Dean said, turning away from the mirror. "I still don't like you dating my sister," Ron piped up with a scowl on his face. "It's not up to you. Besides, I have permission from you, Dean said casually. He had already had this argument. Ron just snarled and stomped from the room. Seamus followed his grumpy friend, sending a glare at the other three boys. As soon as the door closed, the boys let loose with their laughter. "Did you see those robes?" "I don't know what Mrs. Weasley was thinking. Sometimes I feel sorry for Ron," Gary said between chuckles. He knew from the twins that Bill had better dress robes than those, and Ron could have used them. "I don't either, mate. But I'll tell you what, if my ma ever tried to get me in something like that, I would have set it on fire," Dean said. "Come on, let's go find our dates," Neville suggested. And the three took one last look in the mirror and left to get the girls. Gary went to the barrels that guarded the Hufflepuff dorm and waited for someone to fetch Susan. When she came out, his jaw dropped. Susan was dressed in a daring red, skin-tight gown. At the neck were small gold jewels that sparkled light onto her face, making her look like a nymph. Her hair was pulled back into a chignon, with wisps of loose strands framing her face. To Gary, she looked stunning. "Oh, Merlin, you look great. I'm surprised your aunt let you wear such a mature dress," Gary said stupidly. Susan frowned, a cute pout on her lips, then just as quickly she grinned. "She didn't, but it is better to ask for forgiveness than try and get permission," she said with a brilliant smile. "Whatever the cause, I approve. Shall we, my lady?" Gary said, jutting out his elbow. "We shall, good sir," she agreed and placed her hand in the crook. They journeyed to the entrance hall and soon enough spotted Harry and Daphne. Harry's robes were a dark green with a light green trim, which brought out his eyes. Somehow he managed to tame his hair so it slicked back from his face. Daphne's dress was a deep emerald green with light green trimming. It fell mid-knee and flared from the waist. The bodice was tight and showed her ever-growing curves. The open robe she wore over it was silver to complement the dress. Her hair was fashioned in curls that hung down her back, but was pulled back from her face and held with a small silver butterfly hair clip. "You guys look good," Gary said as they joined the pair. "You don't look bad yourself," Daphne complimented. She was taking in Susan's dress with a quirk of her eyebrow. Susan just shrugged and wiggled her eyebrows. McGonagall opened the doors to the great hall and announced that the students could enter. The usual 12 Christmas trees were bedecked with everything from luminous holly berries to real, hooting, golden owls. The walls of the hall had all been covered in sparkling silver frost, with hundreds of garlands of mistletoe and ivy crossing the starry black ceiling. The house tables had vanished. Instead, there were about 100 smaller, lantern-lit ones, each seating about a dozen people. You could see from the windows, an area of lawn right in front of the castle had been transformed into a sort of grotto full of fairy lights, meaning hundreds of actual living fairies were sitting in the rose bushes that had been conjured there, and fluttering over the statues of what seemed to be Father Christmas and his reindeer. Gary and Harry led their dates to a table in the middle of the room. They were soon joined by Terry and Mandy, along with Tracy and Spencer. Neville and Luna were at a table to their right with Dean and Ginny. All of the third-year mutineers were attending. Ellie Godfrey was Victor's date. He decided that it would be easier to escort one of the twins' friends than to try and sort out the fangirls, much to the thanks of the older mutineers. The doors opened again, and the champions filed through. Cedric was escorting his girlfriend, Cho Chang. Fleur looked as radiant as ever in robes of silver-grey satin and was accompanied by the Ravenclaw Quidditch captain, Roger Davies. Victor and Ellie made a cute couple, even with the size difference. Ellie kept giggling as she looked at the stunned students. Dinner was served by ordering off a menu, instead of the usual buffet style. All you had to do was look at the menu, place your hands next to your plate, and say what you wanted. The children chatted as they ate. The Potter twins were a bit disappointed that Crumb couldn't join them, but were happy to have Barn and his date, Astoria, at the table. Many of the mutineer girls were dates of the Durmstrang boys they had made friends with. They talked about the difference between their schools and generally just kept the conversation light. This was a day to relax. Luna could be heard saying to stay away from the mistletoe as it was infested with noggles. Neville just nodded in agreement and went along with it. When all the food had been consumed, Dumbledore stood up and asked the students to do the same. Then, with a wave of his wand, all the tables zoomed back along the walls, leaving the floor clear, and then he conjured a raised platform into existence along the right wall. A set of drums, several guitars, a lute, a cello, and some bagpipes were set upon it. The Weird Sisters now trooped up onto the stage to wildly enthusiastic applause. They were all extremely hairy and dressed in black robes that had been artfully ripped and torn. As they picked up their instruments, the lanterns on all the other tables had gone out, and the champions and their partners were standing up. They all looked lovely as they danced the first dance. Crumb guided Ellie around the dance floor like they had been partnered for years. Roger Davies, on the other hand, had a glazed look in his eyes, and you could tell it was Fleur who was leading, though she did a good job of it. Cedric and Cho were also doing well, and they both smiled at each other all through the dance. Harry looked at the staff table and saw most of the staff was there dressed to the nines, well except Snape, who had on his usual teaching robes. though his hair seemed cleaner. The only professor that wasn't there was Mooney. He volunteered to watch the map tonight so everyone could have a break, which made Harry a little sad that his godfather couldn't enjoy the night. Even Professor Watts attended, somehow dressed in blue and bronze dress robes. Sally could be seen off to the side of the hall, bobbing her head to the music. The Hogwarts ghosts mingled with the crowd, telling of Christmases past. The entire ball was going well. Everyone was having a good time. The Weird Sisters soon upped the beat for the younger crowd. The only two that didn't seem to be enjoying themselves was Ron and Hermione. Ron wouldn't dance with his date, and Hermione soon left in tears after he yelled at her. Even Seamus seemed to having a good time with his date, some Hufflepuff girl Harry didn't know. At least he danced with her. Harry took Daphne to the cleared area outside the castle to cool off and have a romantic walk. They were strolling down one of the paths when they came upon Hagrid and Madame Maxim. "We shouldn't disturb them," Daphne said as she tugged on Harry's sleeve. "Let's take a different path. Look, that one over there looks empty." She pointed to a brightly lit path which had the Father Christmas statue at the end. "Okay," Harry said, letting her guide him away. Just as they were turning down the other path, Madame Maxim started shouting at Hagrid. Daphne just pulled harder on Harry's arm. "It's none of our business. Hagrid is a grown man. Leave it," she said firmly. Harry sighed and nodded. He ran his hand down her arm and grasped her tiny hand in his. They ventured away from the arguing couple and soon found a bench to rest on. "Are you having a good evening?" Harry asked, turning to face his lovely date. Even after all that dancing, she still looked beautiful. Her face lit up with a brilliant smile. "I have never had such a wonderful night, thanks to my devoted boyfriend," she said and kissed him on the cheek, making him blush. "That's great," Harry stammered. Then he looked into her eyes and his face softened. "I'm having a great time as well." With that, he leaned forward and they shared their first kiss. It was light and kind of awkward, but sweet nonetheless. "Thank you for being such a wonderful person." Daphne blushed and leaned her head against his shoulder. They sat for a while, just enjoying the night. The ball finally concluded at midnight, and all the gentlemen escorted their dates to their dorms and then proceeded to their own rooms. Gary ushered Susan to the Berylls, and just as they were about to arrive, Susan pulled him into an alcove. She then took his face in her hands and planted a firm kiss on his lips. After that stunning moment, she ran out of the alcove and entered her dorm. Gary touched his fingers to his lips, let out a whoop, and then proceeded to walk in a daze to his common room. "Oh, look at Gary," Lavender said to Parvati as he exited the portrait. "It looks like he was either smacked or kissed." She smirked smugly. "With the way Susan was all decked out, I'm going with a kiss," the other girl said with a giggle. "None of your business," Gary said, snapping out of his stupor and sticking his tongue out at the two snickering girls. "Did you guys have a good night?" he asked, changing the subject. "Schmidt was a perfect gentleman," Parvati stated, happy that she agreed to go with the older boy. "Kurt danced with me all night," Lavender said with a dreamy smile. Her date was quite handsome, and she hoped that they could continue to get to know one another, even if it was just friendship. "That's great," Gary said. "Well, I'm going to get out of these robes and go to bed." He waved to all his friends and proceeded to do just that. It was a good night and relieved a lot of tension. Harry made sure to call Remus on the mirror to ensure himself that the man at least got dinner. Remus reported that all was well, and he did enjoy the wonderful meal that Hogwarts planned for the evening. Meanwhile, with the parents a week before Christmas, the Potters called another meeting. This time they had good news. They were renting a yacht for the day and treating everyone to a day of relaxation. Lily mentioned a cruise, but it was decided that no one could take the time off for that amount of time. So they all agreed that when Voldemort was gone, everyone, including the children, would take a week-long cruise up the British coastline. This night, though, was just for the parents. Sirius even managed to get a date with a French single mother, a Valette Courtois, whose daughter was at Hogwarts with the Beauxbatons assembly. She was a beautiful woman with long blonde hair and a pixie face. She was tall and willowy, with the grace of a dancer. She had come into the Hogsmeade library to see what it was all about and struck up a conversation with Sirius, who was manning the crystal booth. Gary had expressed his joy that his godfather was finally dating. Instead of meeting at the manor as they usually did, everyone decided to meet at the docks. It was a general consensus that they would be going semi-formal. so only casual suits and party dresses. No one wanted to dress up. They all just wanted to relax. The large crowd of parents, and Sirius and his date, converged on the small dock known as St. Saviour's Dock on the south bank of the River Thames, 420 meters east of Tower Bridge, and forms the eastern end of the picturesque and historic embankment that starts at Tower Bridge known as Shad Thames. The other side of the dock is Jacob's Island. At the end of the dock was a small yacht. It was only 1 story high, with rooms to change if needed, and enough facilities to make sure everyone was taken care of. James hired a tour guide and a catering company. At the front end of the deck of the yacht, there was a group of small tables that fit 6 people. The railings were alight with bright blue Christmas lights, which gave the area soft lighting. The radio played classical carols, and there was a dance floor set up on the other side of the deck. Lining the dance floor were poles of the same blue lights. Dinner was buffet style, with tables set to the right side of the deck, which were filled with international dishes of Thai turkey phyllo dippers, clementine and vodka-baked salmon with beetroot creme fraiche sauce, triple cheese and aubergine lasagna, British beef crostini, smoked fish and potato latkes, sharing a platter and many other delicious foods. The parents were ecstatic to be trying so many different countries' foods. James, Lily, Sirius, Valette, Wright, and Wren all sat at the head table after gathering their food. They kept the conversation light. "So, Valette, are you enjoying yourself?" James asked politely after the dinner started dying down. "Oui, it is good to be out on a dinner date. Thank you for inviting me," the blonde answered with a wistful smile. "It has been so long since I have enjoyed myself. It is not easy to be the only parent of a teenage girl." "Do you mind if I ask what happened to Mr. Courtois? If it is not too personal," Lily asked tentatively. "My husband was killed by Death Eaters when he was visiting your ministry," the woman replied sadly. "I am so sorry," Lily said as she grabbed the blonde's hand and gently rubbed her shoulder, feeling bad for bringing up such a sad memory. "It is fine. It was a while ago. It still hurts a bit, but now I am getting over the pain," she said with a shaky smile. "My daughter, she is telling me, Mama, you are to be dating again. She is very insistent that this must be true," Valette said proudly. "Well, all the better for me," Sirius said smugly. "Come on, my beautiful date, let's dance." And he stood and held out his hand to her. She took it, and the two went and joined the other couples on the dance floor. "I shouldn't have said anything. I have no idea why I asked that," Lily said. There was a little niggling feeling in the back of her mind that no one could be trusted. And she didn't know this woman. Maybe she had been living on the edge for too long. "No, you probably shouldn't have, but I do understand why you did. Come on, Lily Flower, let's join everyone and relax. You need to unwind," James said as he stood and took her by the elbow and led her to the dance floor. They swayed to the soft music. Lily laid her head on James' shoulder and just released all the tension and flowed with the music. "I wonder how the ball it going," she said in a whisper, not wanting to break the moment. "We taught the boys how to behave at such a function. I'm sure they're doing well, perfect little gentlemen. Don't worry about the kids tonight. It's our night to enjoy." With that, he moved a little more determined in his steps. He wanted it to be a night to remember. Lily laughed and followed along. After about 10 minutes of dancing, the yacht started to cruise the Thames. The guide was pointing out all the historical sights that could be seen from the river. Things like the Houses of Parliament, the Tower of London, and the Cutty Sark, and many other attractions. Many of the parents enjoyed the tour and the open bar. Others decided that the dance floor was a better option. No one talked about the things they had been stressing over, and everyone had a wonderful time just cutting loose.